Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this video is an attempt to clarify what Spiritfire is. Now, if you missed it, Spiritfire is a game from Orange Nebula. The campaign just launched, and just recently, we had a first impressions video over on the channel. Myself and Meg went down to Orange Nebula, we spent 2 days there, we dove into the game, we played it a lot, we talked to them about the nature of the game design, what works for us, what doesn't. It was more than just a showcase, it was a conversation around the game, where it's going, and how to even communicate a game that is different than other games out there. And make no mistake, Spiritfire is different than other games out there, which does make things hard. Then, we put out a first impressions video, and there were a decent amount of people who were like, hey, I still kind of don't know what Spiritfire is, and so this is an attempt to get into that more. Now, I will say there are some of you who are going to want a 3-minute conversation around what Spiritfire is, and I'll try to give that to you. But I'm going to give that to you a little later in the video, so if you're just here for that one bit, skip to that timestamp. There'll be a timestamp around explaining what Spiritfire is as concisely as I possibly can for you. I will have that timestamp for you. But until then, I'm going to ramble a bit around the general nature around game design, why we play games, the complexities behind why Spiritfire is hard to explain, and a bit of all of that. And so there is going to be a peripheral conversation as part of this video. Also, I think this robe works really well for Spiritfire, and I don't wear this robe often enough in videos, so I'm okay with this. In any case, Spiritfire, there are several problems trying to communicate what Spiritfire is, and there are several problems, and I will say Orange Nebula has already released a few other videos since then. I have not had a chance to look at them yet, so I don't know if they further clarify how to explain the game as efficiently as possible, but I will try to link those down below so you have all the resources at your disposal. But I'm going to say a few kind of surrounding things before we get into all of this. Number one is I get it. I do. I remember myself, I was a huge fan of Vindication, and I backed Unsettled purely on the strength of trusting Orange Nebula's reputation. Trusting that they had done an incredible job with Vindication. They had put out a game that I adore, and so I was like, you know what? Unsettled, the campaign to me, did not do a good job. The original Unsettled campaign did not do a good enough job to me to conveying what the game was and how it played. And I backed it on the strength of the reputation. And I love Unsettled. I think Unsettled is incredible. It's not as good as Vindication, but it's so close. They're neck and neck. They're such incredible experiences, and Orange Nebula did deliver on Unsettled. Now, make no mistake, that is not a guarantee that same degree of trust, that just because they delivered on Unsettled, just because they delivered a game that many people do love, that's not a guarantee that they will do the same thing with Spiritfire. That risk, that uncertainty should absolutely be present on your mind. It does help that they had a similar situation with Unsettled. It does help that they had a game that they were ambitious with and weren't able to fully communicate the scope of exactly where the game was, and yet they still delivered an incredible experience when all was said and done. That should be another notch in their favor, but it's still not a guarantee. But I guess the only reason I really bring that up is to note that they have been in this position before, and at least for me, they delivered, and I'm also empathetic to the understanding, to the idea that you might be someone who doesn't really fully grasp what Spiritfire is, and you want to. Because you want the excuse to back it. You want to be there, but you don't fully grasp what the game is, and you want to understand more so you can see if it's a game for you. I understand that position. The complexities in trying to explain Spiritfire come from a few different positions. The first is the very nature of that first impressions video is it was being done not in our studio, not in a studio properly. It was being done in a conference room with a camera that was set up for a front-facing shot. There were no top shots. There were no ability to really show you the gameplay, the components. That's going to be another aspect as to why the game was hard to understand or to explain. Another aspect of it is the fact that the game is still a game in progress. It very much has a lot of the core concepts are done. There's enough there that you can play through large portions of the game, but there are so many aspects that are still being tweaked and developed, and ideas in play and in flux, and there are things in motion, and that means that it's not, as much as I spent an entire, day diving into the game and playing through aspects of it, there are still many aspects of it that are not fully fleshed out, and that does make something harder to explain. And then the third thing, and something that's been talked about to a degree, is to a certain extent, it is something different. It is something new. I can pick out portions and parts of Spiritfire and talk about how they relate to other experiences, but at the end of the day, Spiritfire is still something new to an extent. There are similarities, there are aspects, but even just a basic concept, a basic question, how do you win Spiritfire? How do you win? Most games, if you ask me about most games, I can tell you how you win. I don't know if I can fully tell you how you win Spiritfire. And that changes the conversation immensely. Okay, if I can't tell you how you win, what even is this? And because it is something different, it makes it harder to explain and to convey without all the proper tools at your disposal. And so it is a hard game to fully convey. I will say that I am somebody who has been in the position before where I've had games put in front of me that didn't have a clear winning condition. And to me, those games have been question marks, and to me, some of those games have not worked for me. I know that Dorf Romantic is a game that has no clear win goal. You play so you can get better at the optimization of the game, and then at some point you stop playing. And that didn't work for me. Mostly because Dorf Romantic I found to be too light of an experience for what I was looking for, and so even though I understood the concept, even though the concept of you can't lose, but you can just get better at how you optimize, even though that concept worked for me, the core gameplay loop was a little too light. Mythwind from Open Owl Games is another one and that's one that I know that the prototype I played has come a long way since where the final game is, so I am curious to dive into the final game and see how the final game delivers on the concept, but that was another game that had no premise of winning. It didn't have a premise of you can win, you play so you can get more efficient, you explore and you uncover the story and you engage with the world around you, but there isn't a win or lose concept, and those are always harder things to explain as you go through it. And for me, that didn't land the same way. Again, I felt that the elements of what you were building towards or the challenges you were facing in that game didn't resonate with me as much, at least in the prototype phase. I guess the reason I'm bringing these up is I can say that I am somebody who has been faced with games where you couldn't win before, and I wasn't as personally engaged with some of those concepts, whereas in the case of Spiritfire, I buy into it a lot more, while still having question marks, while still having things that as a gamer I want to know, why am I playing this game? Why am I diving into the experience? And this leads itself to the conversation of why do you play games? When you sit down to table a game, what is it that you play? Why do you play? What is the driving force behind your experience? And when you think about it, it's very often instinctively we want to say to win, but that's very often not the case. If you've ever sat down to a game of apples to apples, or pick whatever game you want, I'm just bringing apples to apples as a random example, whether it's Dixit, whether it's apples to apples, whether it's code names, most of the time there are many games in that genre, that party genre, where score isn't kept, score isn't tallied, score isn't even conscious. People are vaguely, peripherally aware of the fact that there is a aspect or concept of score at place, but you're playing because you're enjoying the experience, and you keep going because you enjoy the experience. I've played many games of monikers and not really cared who won at the end of it. It's like, sure, I'll tally up points, but it's not why I'm playing. I'm playing monikers for the experience the game gives me, and winning is a construct in play that does drive some of the things that are happening, but I don't play to win. In fact, very rarely do I play to win. I play because winning is the construct that drives me. And to a certain extent, that's a concept that's true in Spiritfire. We'll get more to Spiritfire soon. Let's just focus on why we play games. So some aspect of it could be to win, to be faced with a challenge, to be faced with an opportunity where it's your job to overcome that challenge, to persevere, and to in some way, through the way you apply the game, the state, the mechanics, your challenges, something about what you apply of portions of yourself happen within the game, and the end result is that you feel you were challenged, and that your goal is to attempt to overcome that challenge, whether you do or don't. The challenge might be the game itself in a solo or cooperative experience. The challenge might be other players in a competitive experience, but your goal is to apply a challenge to yourself and attempt to overcome it. Some do it specifically to win. Their goal is to win. And sometimes it's about the game, not necessarily the person, but your goal might be to win. Others do it just for the sake of being challenged, that sake of having something in front of you that is challenging and you want to attempt to overcome it, and that's why you do it. Other times there's a sense of discovery. There's a sense of, story or exploration or things that you're finding. I don't know about you. Have you ever played? This is a game. It's an app game where you basically find these little it's alchemy, I think it's called. The idea is you start with like the core elements, and then you combine, earth and water, and boom, you have mud. And then you combine mud and, fire, and boom, you have bricks. And you keep combining things, and you keep getting elements, and all you're doing the entire time is just combining elements to uncover new concepts, and then combining those concepts with other concepts to uncover new concepts. The entire game is a very incredibly popular game that is all about the nature of discovery. That's all it is. It's the nature of discovery. Ironically, I mentioned Mythwind, and I think their next game, which I'm blanking on the name, but Open Owl's game after Mythwind, which I'm totally blanking on what it is, but that game was all about the nature of discovery, and they did a great job. That one did land a lot more for me in the sense that they gave you a real puzzle of discovery as you go through it. There wasn't a clear win-lose concept, but there was a concept of exploration, of discovery, of finding things, of combining things together in a way that gave you that sense of progress and discovery throughout a game system. Those are other things that can drive you forward in a game as far as why you're playing a game. Sometimes it could be story, which to a certain extent goes under the sense of discovery. If you've played Tainted Grail, if you've played Seventh Continent, if you've played dozens of story-driven games, very often it is the story carrying you forward. It is the sense of progress through a literature adventure that is driving how and why you play the game. That is definitely a concept that is present as you go. Why we play games will be a little different for all people. For me, I think it's primarily the sense of challenge. Primarily, I want to feel challenged as I go through an experience. It's not about winning or losing, it's about that sense of challenge, but you often need a destination. You often do, at least I do. I find I want a destination. Whether or not I make the destination is less important than just having a destination at play that drives me forward. That's something that's there for me. This is all a very vague conversation around why we play games because of the fact, and I warned you, by the way, I warned you there's a timestamp if you want to jump straight to how Spiritfire works, that you can jump straight to that. This is a larger, more vague conversation. Which I guess brings us a bit to Spiritfire. The core concept of Spiritfire is that you are going through a journey, which is vague. It's useless. It's not helpful. I'm sorry. Let's start again. The core concept of Spiritfire is you are going through an arc. You're going through a character's arc, and the challenge you are faced with is an optimization challenge. Now, that's a little vague, and I know it's not helpful, but we'll get into that a bit more. You start with a deck. That deck is going to be your life spark, and that spark is going to slowly go away over time. Effectively, actions you take through the game are running on a limited clock, and we'll get to what the actions are, but we'll have to compare things to other things soon. I'm going to try, but you have a limited life spark, and the things you do throughout the game are going to drain that spark. Whatever game system you're running out, think of it as a clock. Everything takes a little bit of time. There are things you can do that add spark back to that deck, and it's a little deck of cards. There are things you can do to slowly add spark back to the deck, but ultimately spark is draining away faster than it's being added to the deck. The better you are at the game, and we haven't talked what the game is, but the better you are at the game, the more accurately or the better you can replenish your spark, and the longer you can delay your journey, the longer you can prolong your journey in the game, and how much you as a character can interact with the world around you. So that's the core idea of the limiting factor on the game. Games need limiting factors. Games need constraints, and the biggest constraint in Spiritfire is your spark is a life pool that is slowly running out, and your character is trying to explore and do as much as they can within the universe. That is one set of challenge that is present. How to get as much out of the game experience within the lifespan of your character. The problem is, your character at a certain point might die. Your character will eventually run out of spark, but the universe of Spiritfire is still ongoing. Think of this as when you play through Gloomhaven. You play through Gloomhaven, your character has an arc. If you've ever played Gloomhaven, you have characters, your characters have arcs. Eventually your character will retire. You continue your adventure, but you continue your adventure with a new character. Spiritfire has elements of similarity to that. Very different, but elements of similarity, which to a certain extent your character's journey is more the story. Not Gloomhaven's story, your character's journey is the story to an extent, but you are operating within a living universe. You are operating within a living world that has impacts of the choices you've made along the way. Because there is going to be a greater sense of quests that are being given to you. Quests that will give you sets of challenges. And the challenges are giving you, think of it as Euro optimization puzzle challenges. The best way I can explain it without going into how an individual challenge works. You'll be given a spread. It's called a spread. Ultimately, it's a page in a book, and it's a spread that gives you some degree of how you are manipulating various things in front of you through classic Euro mechanisms in play. You're going to be having a deck that you're working with, a deck that you're going to be deck building the entire time throughout the course of the game. You're going to be unlocking various card packs that will feed into your deck and effectively be giving you more and more tools to build out a TCG style, a TCG feel of a deck that gives you the opportunities and the tools to manipulate within the spread in front of you. That spread represents a Euro puzzle. It represents a cube optimization pusher. I'm being vague with the terms because they are different. They are going to be different puzzles that give you different challenges, and the way you have to operate within your deck and the way these quests and challenges are going to give you a driving force as to how you're supposed to operate and what you're supposed to do on any given page. They are thematically tied to things, so perhaps you're meditating, perhaps you encounter something in a forest and you have to choose between running away or meditating. I don't know if that's a bad choice, but you're given that hypothetical choice. Depending on what you choose, you're faced with some sort of thematic puzzle that is going to be both thematic but also Euro cube pusher along the way as far as what you then have to do and how efficiently you have to do it. Perhaps in the concept of meditation, you have to do, let's just call them 3 cycles of meditation. Let's just call it that. I'm trying to convey concepts here that are harder to convey. And so perhaps you go through 3 cycles of meditation. But now it's your job. You're operating within a deck and you're trying to go through 3 cycles of meditation. The practical reality is at certain points along the way, you're going to get stuck in that optimization puzzle, and that's where you have to often reset and lose spark as you go through things. Again, spark is your ongoing currency of life force that is going to be slowly running out, and it's going to run out faster the more inefficient you are, and the more efficient you are, the more ways you can find ways to slowly replenish your spark and elongate the life of the journey that you are on. You go through these spreads, you encounter these things, and that's going to engage in a degree of story and impact along these greater arcs of these worlds that you're encountering with. So yes, there is your character's arc, but perhaps you go ahead and you met that villager, and you're going to, again, because you meditated, now you open up certain arcways and pathways in that villager, and so there's a story aspect as far as how the world is being impacted by your decisions, while being a mechanical aspect of how well you are able to optimize your deck and work within your particular puzzle to be able to do a bunch of things on these cube pusher puzzles that are present in front of you. Now the game comes with a bunch of spreads, which is part of the hard part about explaining the game, is you're explaining a concept of output and input. You are given a challenge, and then you're given a thematic aspect that ties to a set of mechanics in front of you that are going to drive you forward, but you still are going to be dealing with different little puzzles every single time you go through it. And the puzzles, to a certain extent, will be variable. They'll be variable based on the challenge you're facing. They'll be variable based on the extra optional challenges you're engaging with. They'll be variable based on how efficiently you have to do the puzzle and the deck you're facing off against and the situations you're in. So it's kind of an input and output situation where you have this core puzzle at the center that is the driving complexity of how you have to operate within it. To a certain extent, to try to take an output of this, when you play a game of Gloomhaven, it is easy to say, hey, this is a dungeon crawler. This is a dungeon crawler. You have a character, they go on a map, they run around, and then they go ahead and finish and kill things. The dungeon crawler that you're engaging, the scenario you're engaging with within a world of Gloomhaven, is the intermediary from the larger scope and scale of decisions that you're engaging with along the way. You make certain choices, and those choices lead you to a certain map and an encounter, and then based on the map and the encounter outcome, you move to the next choice that you are engaging with along the way. Spiritfire is similar, but it's not a dungeon crawler. That concept of you have this larger world, you have these choices, you have the ways you're engaging with it, but instead of having a dungeon crawler as the center focus, you have a deck of cards, you have a particular puzzle that will be different not every single time, but there'll be degrees of difference and degrees of variances that keep that puzzle fresh for you as you engage. So you have the larger story arc. The thing that's making it hard to explain and convey is I don't think there's ever been a dungeon crawler where every dungeon scenario is more of a Euro optimization puzzle. This is Orange Nebula taking what Orange Nebula does well and translating it to the dungeon crawler epic campaign genre in a way that just hasn't been done before, to the best of my knowledge, which is why it's so hard to convey, which is why it's so hard to explain. If you have played role-player adventures, it does have some abstract similarities to that concept. If you've played through role-play adventures, you have an arc, you have a story, you have a choose-your-own-adventure element. But then you're going to go ahead and be faced with some sort of challenge. Maybe you're doing lock-picking, and so you do lock-picking, you have cards, you have a hand of cards, you have tools in front of you, but now you're doing a lock-picking level 3 challenge. And so now you have to start drawing dice from a bag, you start applying them to role-play adventures, and then using your cards to manipulate the dice and hoping to get the right set of values that ultimately determine whether you passed or failed that challenge. It has similarities. It has similarities to what Spiritfire is doing in the sense that, again, like roleplay adventures, you have a deck of cards. You have your own separate deck of cards that is going to be you're going to be deck building throughout the game. You're going to be unlocking card packs based on a ton of different things that are going on in the game and slowly adding cards to the general pool, to the way you can deck build, and to giving you more tools and options as far as how you can overcome specific harder challenges you'll be faced along the way. Because whenever you are engaging with a challenge, there are two senses of burden in front of you. There are two senses of, why am I doing this? What is the driving force that has me playing this game? Some of it's going to come down to the larger epic story around you. Again, if you've played Gloomhaven, some people are playing Gloomhaven because they want to understand what's going on in Gloomhaven. They want to see the choices, they want to see the consequences, the impact, they want to side with certain factions and see how the tale unfolds. Others are playing it because they want to do the dungeon crawler part, and they just want to learn and unlock things along the way. You play a dungeon, you level up a character, and you get a new perk, and you have a new card, and you deck build your card a little more, and you dive into the next dungeon. Why are you still doing that? Because there's a sense of challenge to overcoming the next challenge, and the next challenge, and the next challenge, until eventually at a certain point you either get sick of Gloomhaven and move on, or you complete the adventure and you're like, that was cool, let me go out and buy Frosthaven. Spiritfire has that same concept. You are diving into any individual challenge, and part of the sense of achievement of overcoming a challenge is that sometimes it's going to be hard just to overcome a challenge, period. Sometimes you will have to deck build. Sometimes you will have to add cards to your deck, find or unlock new cards, and find ways to slowly level up your character effectively so that you can approach a challenge that is not a dungeon crawler, but rather a Euro optimization puzzle with a degree of blockage of how you can do it and the timing and constraints around you, and you're using your deck to try to overcome that. And so the part of the challenge is just the ability to overcome. The second part of the challenge is the time involved with you trying to do so. because each of these challenges will require time. That's your spark. Your spark is slowly ticking down. So you might be faced with a challenge where you're going to beat it. It's not a question of whether you beat it, but the more efficiently you can beat it, the longer you can prolong your journey. And so you're always trying to optimize as you play. If you sit there and say, hey, why am I playing Spiritfire? Same question as, why am I playing Gloomhaven? It's the sense of challenge that is being presented. It's the sense of story and adventure that is being unlocked. And I understand that this is a vague concept because a Euro-style dungeon crawler epic campaign game just hasn't been done. The closest thing I could say is it's almost like a cross between elements of Gloomhaven, elements of roleplay adventures, and all the things that make Orange Nebula's games incredibly appealing, if you are someone who is appealed to by those things. The journey is mostly a solo one. There are ways you can engage with other players. There are ways you can have multiple players at the table interacting. But as far as the core concept of how you're going to engage with this, to a certain extent, think of it like Marvel Champions. I know I'm trying to pull in as many comparisons as I can to touch upon points that I think are relevant. When you play Marvel Champions, you can certainly tackle things together head-on. You can also do the exact same thing solo, and the biggest incentive to tackle head-on is the sense of companionship of another person at the table. I would say it's probably a step down from Marvel Champions in terms of why you would play it cooperatively versus solo. It is primarily a solo experience. It is one that it happens to be you can tackle challenges with other players. You can do things like that, but the core experience is designed as an experience that you're going through on your own. You are deck building your deck to be able to tackle the things in front of you. There are not multiple little characters set up in a dungeon. There are ways you can engage with the game as a 2-player experience, as a 3-player experience. There are ways you can engage with that in that format, but it's not the way the game is primarily designed. It is designed primarily as an experience in which you are trying to optimize. You are being given a world to explore. You're given things along the way that interrupt that exploration. Again, think Gloomhaven and think the larger world, but then also think the individual dungeons you dive into that break up your story arc as you go through it. It's the closest similarities I can give. That roleplay adventures and that Gloomhaven combination are the closest experiences I can give to what Spiritfire is attempting to do as far as how they operate. It is hard to explain. I recognize that. Even if I sat down and played it with you for half an hour, there'd be parts of you that aren't really fully connecting the dots of what this is, because I didn't. Because I sat down and I played it and I was trying to struggle to see, I understand what I'm doing, but where does it fit into the larger ecosystem? Because it hasn't been done before. It's one of those things that sounds pretentious when you say it, oh, it hasn't been done before, it's new, it's different. But to a certain extent, it is. As far as how it will land, that's where it's hard to say for sure. If you watch the first impressions, we cover this. Based on what I've seen, I'm very optimistic about how Spiritfire will land for me. I am not confident that it's a game I'll play for 200 hours. Most campaign games I do play for a long time, and then eventually I get to a point where I'm a little tapped out of the experience. And so for me, based on how I play games, I might play Spiritfire for 30 hours, and then move on from it. I might play it for 200 hours, because I've done that with Gloomhaven. I've given Gloomhaven 200 hours of my life, and I am at the point where I'm ready to move on from it, but every game is going to be different as far as the point in which I tap out of the experience. And so I cannot possibly comment on what point I tap out of Spiritfire. I don't know that answer. I can tell you that the things they are doing, though, they feel challenging. The puzzle being put in front of you feels like an obstacle. I am incentivized to optimize. I feel that sense of challenge. I feel that sense of trying to do better. I feel that sense of discovery, of wanting to unlock another card pack, to figure out what cards I can put into my deck. Again, combine the greater kind of arc of Gloomhaven with characters and a larger story and breaking up the story with the individual dungeon crawlers. Combine the more Euro mechanisms of roleplay adventures and the way they handle that. And then combine the elements of an LCG, but instead of an LCG where you get a card pack every month and a half or whatever it is, instead you get the card packs in the game themselves. And so you have that sense of unlock of, here's your starting cards, but as you go through the game, you unlock those little LCGs within the game. It's a combination of several things that have been done before, but not a single part of the overall picture of what Spiritfire is doing has been fully done, which is why it's hard to explain. And I hope this video leaves you a little clearer on what Spiritfire is. I hope it does, and I'm sorry if it doesn't. I genuinely am. I want to convey to you what it is, but I feel the best I can do is give you peripheral tastes of what the game experience is. And that, combined with seeing things on the campaign page, combined with watching the various graphics and things that Orange Nebula puts out, and finally possibly having it on your table, I don't think it's an experience that is easy to convey. And I'm sorry for that. I do think that if you have liked Orange Nebula games before, if you have liked what they're doing, and you are someone that enjoys and appreciates solo play, I think this game experience is for you. I think if you're someone that likes solo play, and you also like Euro optimization, card pushers, or card games in general, like if you like, trading card games, TCGs, CCGs, and that sense of trying to push yourself and deck build around it, then I think this game is for you. I think there are going to be many people who this game is not for, though. And I don't know the full overlap or audience and all that. I mean, it's not going to be easy to say, but I think those two categories are safer categories for this game. But there's always going to be some degree of question mark when you try to push the boundaries. Once upon a time, Gloomhaven was a game that was pushing the boundaries and doing something no one had ever done before. And I'm not trying to say Spiritfire is the next Gloomhaven. I'm not trying to say that for a second. I am trying to say that sometimes, when you're doing something large and ambitious, and something that doesn't play in an hour where I can simply just play the game and show you it, but where the scope and scale of the game branches over dozens of hours or hundreds of hours, it totally changes the ability to convey that message to somebody else. And so in some way, I hope this video helped. And if it didn't, I'm sorry. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I'll link to the campaign down below. I'll link to Orange Nebula's other videos, and I'm curious which way you end up going on this one. In any case, and until next time, I hope you have a good one.